and welcome to the Spawdcast. My name is Carrie Hyde, and I'm your host and your pet's life coach. Today, we're going to be talking about the history of dog food. And while some of you may think that that's an uninteresting topic, it's actually one of the most interesting topics. And so I brought in some of the most interesting people that I know, because in order for us to understand why it's so important for us to change what our pets are feeding, we need to understand why we were feeding the food that we've been feeding and how it became on the shelves in your local grocery stores. So I brought in some great people I think are going to be fabulous at talking. So first I want to introduce you to my co-host for today, Christina Geiger.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Christina. So Christina is one of my clients, and she has 2 dogs, and one of her dogs has diabetes. And so she has made sure and makes every effort to make sure that her dog is, both dogs, but her particular dog with diabetes, is on the right diet and making sure that she's not eating kibble and doing anything that will help that diabetes. Since you've been doing that, how have you been finding with the diabetes? Is it getting manageable?
Completely manageable. After I changed her diet and we went back to have her blood work checked again, we only needed 3 mLs of insulin twice a day, which I've been told is an amazing thing for a 12-year-old dog.
Yeah.
So I will live and die by a raw diet now.
You know, it's interesting because I always say that the clients who see the change from when their health, when you have it, especially diabetes, because it's pretty measurable. We can measure it with the insulin, how much the body needs it. So those are usually the clients that become the most compliant to, you know, changing their diets and doing that. So, but we needed to bring somebody on, and Christina's going to help me to interview our expert for today, who is one of the most interesting people I know. I have introduced him to you before and told you that he is one of my heroes. And I say that not jokingly, I say that totally because he has dedicated his entire life to animals, and in a big way. Like, I've dedicated my entire life to cats and dogs, but he's dedicated his life to animals of all sorts. And so I want to introduce you today to Dr. Richard Patton. Hi, Dr. Patton, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Every time I interview you, get all red and flustered a little bit. Because I say because you're so amazing. Why won't you let me just say that?
I don't know. I guess it's a pathologic shyness.
Oh, so Dr. Patton is a bioscientist. So Dr. Patton, can you tell us what is a bioscientist? Most people don't really understand what that is.
I guess I would say you all know bio meaning life or biology, and then science. So it's a combination of the science of studying the biology of life.
The biology of life. Thank you. I needed that definition myself.
Yes.
So when we talked, Dr. Patton and I had spoken on the phone before, and we kind of thought about what we could talk about. And it got brought up by Dr. Patton, let's talk about the history of dog food. And sometimes people think, you know, that's not relevant in our meaning of what we're trying to do, which is to get dogs to eat healthier. So let's start with let's just dive into this. How did dog food become dog food? How did food become dog food?
This is a very good question to kind of have as a beginning or a background. Anyone can imagine that, you know, let's go back 200-300 years, there was no Iams or Purina, but there was certainly dogs and cats. And so what did they eat then? And we can come forward in time, things didn't really start to get commercialized till about the 1950s. And it began with what was called a Gaines meal, which was probably originated in agriculture feed mills, and it was just that, a meal. But pretty soon they discovered the extruder, which the vast majority of all pet food today is made on an extruder. And this is a machine that is a long barrel with a screw going down the middle of it, rotating. And the tolerance between the screw and the wall of the barrel is very close. So what this thing does is it generates heat, and the heat cooks the food in the barrel, and when it exits the end of the barrel, it expands. And this is how you get a kibble, because they have a knife that is rapidly rotating at the end of the barrel, slicing these strings into little kibbles. These are then dried, then covered with fat, then covered with powders of some sort, and that is in 4 or 5 sentences, that's the history of pet food.
So, if you look up the history of pet food, sometimes you'll find out that a lot of people will talk about how it was started because of the war and trying to get away from canning. And have you done some research into that, and biscuits and?
I don't remember ever running across that sort of information, but you're certainly right in the timing, Carrie, in that the pet food industry came into existence and took off as a result right after World War II, which would have been the late 40s, early 50s.
Right.
And of course, that's when things like Spam came into existence, where they tried to capitalize on using more of an animal.
Yeah. So I heard that there was a guy who was out at the shores or something, and they were making biscuits for the sailors, and they found out that the dogs liked it, and so they were trying to create a shelf life for food, and then they ended up feeding that to the dogs. So there's all sorts of different kinds of interesting stories that come about. But I think one thing we probably can agree on, Dr. Patton, is that pet food was created in order to make money, right?
I had heard a story where it came out in the war and trying to feed the military dogs in the war.
Yeah.
And so they needed this dry product, and then it just kind of stuck with it being convenient to feed it. Yeah.
Being convenient, yeah. But it went away from what our animals were eating before, correct? Like you said, thousands of years ago, our animals were eating meats and things that they hunted, and now all of a sudden they're eating dried, extrusion processed kibble. So,
well, you're touching on a lot of different things we could discuss, and I think overarching all of this is my observation about the modern day pet food. I think when it comes to a buying decision, people, it's like a three-legged stool. There is the one leg is economy. Obviously, kibble is economic. Then there's convenience. Kibble is convenient. But the third leg of this stool is proper nutrition. And that suffers for economy.
right.
Compared to, the kibbles that are out there.
Yeah.
I don't feel it's impossible to have all three.
Yeah. I agree. It's impossible to have all three. You cannot have all three. Something has to give. But I have found with our clients is that you can give up the convenience. There's the one thing you can give up in order to make sure that your pet is eating healthy. Do it yourself. Find ways to do it.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to sound judgmental, because obviously a person with one Chihuahua
Right.
has a different expense than somebody with 4 Rottweilers.
Sure.
And so I don't presume to know what someone else can or can't do. But what I say is, of course, my perpetual rant is excess soluble carbohydrate, and we need to get it out of these foods. And the more you can move in that direction, the better off you are.
Absolutely. I'm on board with that. I preach it all the time. Sometimes I say it so many times, I think people are like, okay, we know already. Carbohydrates. So I'm going to go back a little bit into your history a little. And so what got you started? You went to school to be a bioscientist. When did you start looking and working with animals and formulating diets for them?
I think I was a sophomore in college, and I took a course in animal nutrition, kind of as an afterthought, and I really quite enjoyed it, and to my surprise. And I think maybe there was an inner wisdom operating, because in reality, this ended up a way to be a cowboy and a scientist at the same time. And that fit well.
Yeah.
And at that point, why I thought many things would change in life as I went along, and among them career, but it's been exactly the opposite. Many things have changed, but I've been an animal nutritionist, unchanging.
Wow. Sometimes I think that about myself. Sometimes it's just embedded in me. So you started formulating, when did you, I know you formulated some diets for zoo animals. Were you working at a zoo?
No, I was, at that point, I was employed by Mark Morris Associates. They're the people that made prescription diets. Mm-hmm. They were the pioneers. And my boss, the owner of the company, told me that I'm a PhD, I can't talk to vets. I was allowed to write all his literature, but I couldn't talk to the vets. And I said, well, I'll do your zoo line. He says, that's fine. And so I was shoved over into the zoo line of foods, and was happier to be there anyhow. So that's where I ended up getting zoo experience. And a couple of years later, when I became self-employed, I had lots of zoo clients.
Why couldn't you talk to vets?
That was his opinion.
Okay.
Do you think he was
Which
trying
it's largely still true.
Do you think he was trying to prevent you from learning something with
Oh,
the
no,
veterinarian?
not at all. I don't think he was, subversive in any of his ambitions. He honestly felt that to be a DVM, or to talk to a DVM, you need to be a DVM.
Oh, I see.
And as I mentioned, I think this is still in our way.
Really? Huh. I've been talking to them
And
for
how
a
many
while.
vets listen to you?
None.
I talk to vets all the time. I don't know. So do you think that the zoo animals were being fed better than the pets, the veterinarian animals, the dogs and cats?
I've never been asked that. Yeah, I think there was the zoo professional was more willing to admit they needed to know more, and they were a bit more willing to take on other opinions. And I never found that I was pushing a rock uphill for the most part when I was working with zoo people.
Yeah.
Now some of the zoo management, upper management, I found I would rather deal with the head keeper or the keepers.
Yeah, yeah. But in general, like when you think about talking to somebody who is trying to feed a lion, for example, would you say that they're more open to the fact that a lion has a different diet than a human versus another type of animal? Because I get a lot of, dogs and cats just are supposed to eat this extrusion process kibble without any respect or knowledge of what the canine or the feline actually eats, the carnivore actually eats. Do you think that those are different when you're talking to people who are feeding? Like, I feel like the lion keeper would be like, of course he needs to eat raw meat. But then the veterinarian's like, no raw meat. Do you see a lot of that?
I think you're headed in the correct point of view here. It was always my opinion that the zoo people obsessed about what they called wild behavior, meaning the animal in captivity is behaving just the way it would in the wild. And so it was a little easier to nudge them into, well, what do they eat in the wild? And they'd say, well, they eat this, this, and this. Can we give that? And I'd say, well, let's see. So the discussion, I didn't have to displace dogma in their brain
Right.
to have a discussion. But a lot of other pet owners and many veterinarians, you do. You got to kind of erode their entrenched position before you can have a real exchange of ideas.
Well, that makes sense because when you think about it, you know, a lion obviously is still going to have behaviors that are instinctual and wild. And then we've domesticated behaviorally our animals. And I think that I get that argument a lot from people where they say, well, he doesn't need to eat like he would as a carnivore because he's domesticated. So it would make sense that those two.
But when your dog chases a cat, that's their instinctive behavior. My now 12-year-old Jack Russell Chihuahua, she would come back in the house from being outside with a bird in her mouth. She would have jumped up, grabbed it out of the air, and come and brought it back in the house.
Yeah.
So you can't say that we've domesticated it out. I mean, animals act the way they do because that's their instincts.
Because they still do have those instincts. We've hindered them. We've, you know, put leashes on them and done some things to them. But I think that makes perfect sense as to why so many people and so many veterinarians get into this mindset that they're not biologically able to process food the same way they would if they were wild animals. Has that been your experience, Dr. Patton?
Yeah, I think by and large it has. Another thing you're dealing with is the professionals in the veterinary game that are practitioners today. We got to cut them some slack. They were trained by people who were trained by people who thought that their job was to save us from evil bacteria.
Yeah.
And so this echoes forward, and we still come up against it. And of course, you know, my inside pack of dogs, when I go out to feed the horses in the morning, usually about sunup, they're beside themselves with glee because the first thing they want to do is go eat horse shit. And this is an excellent, you know, source of things that they need.
Yeah.
And of course, in our kind of Victorian prissiness, we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, they don't care. They just want to get at it.
They just want to eat poop.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting how you're trying to save our pets from eating bacteria, and all they want to do is eat the bacteria.
Yeah.
And they want to get in there and you know, yummy, eat the poop kind of thing. So when do you think you kind of realize that the extrusion process is probably, I think I know the answer to this, but when did you realize that this is not nutrition and I need to get away from this?
I can't point to a specific moment of aha, but as I just went along and you know, tried to take in what I was looking at and analyze it correctly, and you'd have, for example, I had pet food clients in the past that one, for example, sold a pet food and he guaranteed to cure hot spots. And it was a meat-based diet. And he said, if you feed my food and the hot spots don't go away, I'll give you your money back. And in 30 years of business, he never had to give his money back.
Wow. So if we go back to the extrusion process and bacteria, for example, when you were telling us and explaining how the extrusion process makes, and they shoot out these little brown pieces of kibble, and then they spray fat over it, and then little powders or whatever, and then they bag it up. Wouldn't you say that sprayed fat and powdered stuff could also have the potential of harming our pets and causing bacteria to grow within the bags?
Well, obviously not ordinarily, or they'd be doing it differently. Their product wouldn't be selling. But what's underlying everything here is this exquisite adaptability that we've all inherited. All mammals have inherited in their DNA. And this enables us to be able to say nutrition is never a crisis. It just slowly gets worse and worse till something else is a crisis. And the reason it's never a crisis is because of our adaptability, the dog and the cat's adaptability. And for example, We all know that a bag of potato chips and a Coke will get you to the next day, okay. But we also know that a lifetime of that diet is going to be shorter than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And so the big kibble people are kind of in the sweet spot in between completely awful and exquisite. And they're economic and they're convenient, and the dogs get excited when you feed them. So they're able to sell this kibble pet food by the trainload every day.
It is by the train load.
Yeah.
What about we'll stay on kibble for a while. The reason I asked you that question is because I have found many kibble companies that have had to be recalled because they found salmonella in their bags, and the food has found salmonella. So which I always find very interesting, because the veterinarians who argue against raw diet, that is their main big argument, is that raw food has salmonella in it, and yet a lot of the recalls are on bags of food that have salmonella. Have you heard that, or do you know why would we get so much salmonella in a bag of food?
No, you're right. On the occasion when there's salmonella in a raw food, it plays right into their wheelhouse. They get to say, "See, told you."
Yeah. All right, Dr. Patton, tell me about the story.
The situation I was alluding to was a client of mine that was selling a food into the market, and a woman bought this food and gave it to her 3 dogs, and one of them became ill. She took it to the clinic, and they diagnosed it with salmonella, and their advice to her was that she raise hell, which she did. She not only called my client, but she went on the evening news saying that this food had made her dog sick. Well, my client sicked me on this situation, and it was a place I could get to, and I went to the clinic, and what I learned was that the dog that got sick had been rescued from the streets, looking like an Auschwitz victim, and in the kennel, it was in process with all the standard shots, such as rabies. And a week later, it was adopted by this woman and brought home to a strange environment with 2 other dogs already established. And a week or so later, it got sick with salmonella. The point here is that the other 2 dogs ate the same food and never missed a beat. We are, and there's many stories you can point to, like the vulture or the cheetah that hauls its kill into the tree and lets it sit in the African sun, or the leopard rather. So we have this ability to deal with microbes in really large quantities. And so when you succumb to a bacteria, either it was a massive load or you were compromised, or both.
Right. So I just kind of going to go back in my days of being a vet tech. What would make that veterinarian even check for salmonella in the first place? Like, I'm going off of regular protocol from a vet tech standpoint. If a dog came in with some diarrhea and upset stomach, we would just not go straight to testing for salmonella. Do you think that she had probably told them that she was eating raw, which would cause that panic kind of thing? It's interesting to me that they tested for salmonella that early on.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to prejudge these people. And I don't know what the standard protocol is when a dog presents, but if it's giving certain signs, probably the standard screening that the clinic does is a stool sample, and look for bacteria.
Yeah. It just was an interesting observation to me, because I don't know a vet who's ever tested for salmonella, a dog, ever. I've never seen it done. But also, I'm a lot older. Maybe that's new protocol. I don't know. But it is interesting to me that the other 2 dogs were perfectly healthy and eating the exact same food and had no problems, and that isn't that is one of the things I find within the industry is that if you have a veterinarian who is against raw, it's really sad to me because it doesn't send them down the right path of looking for what's really wrong. Because as soon as they hear raw, they assume that's the problem, when in fact a lot of times it's not the problem, and then the problem gets misdiagnosed because of that preconceived idea that raw is the problem.
I was actually told that I started the raw process as about the same time as my dog was diagnosed with diabetes. And I was actually told that's what kind of caused the chain reaction to happen.
Oh,
and I was like, I don't really agree with you there.
Yeah.
I've also heard, though, that when you bring a new animal into your house, it's like 3 days for them to even like feel like it's safe, and then like 3 weeks for something else, and then 3 months before they would like consider it home.
Adopt it.
Yeah. And so me bringing a new pet into the house, I probably wouldn't immediately rush a dog with diarrhea. I'd be like, okay, it's the stress. They changed environments, they changed, everything's changing. And so I wouldn't, but I'm also not quick to go to the doctor for myself. People laugh, so.
Yeah, no, sometimes we do, but it's just always interesting to me how we get to that, especially as I told you, I've seen so many cases of salmonella within kibble. Mm-hmm. Kibble, they find salmonella in bags of kibble all the time. So it's just interesting to me. But so going into we talk about our history starting back to what dogs ate before there was dog and cat food. They ate food, and then comes on the market, right? We've got canned food comes on the market, and then we've got extrusion process, and now we've got kibble, which has been really historically, as far as we're looking at the history of dog food, kibble has had the longest run. If you ask, it's had the longest run. Kibble's been going on for years and years and years and years. Have you noticed the shift just recently? I have. 2008 is when I think I first heard that we need to feed our dogs better. They weren't feeding the bad kibble, which I think all kibble is bad, but the really bad kibble. And then we shifted into better kibble. And now we're in a new place, I think, with pet food, which is the whole fresh food diets. And that's becoming a new thing where you have all of these home deliveries of foods. And you're not going to like this, Dr. Patton, but if you haven't noticed it already, it is loaded in carbohydrates, but it's whole and fresh. Is this something you're starting to notice and see? I know you're in New Mexico, but out here in California, it's horrible.
I'm not sure. What exactly is your question?
Are you seeing, so when we look at the history, right, we see it started out as natural, eat off the whatever you eat. Then we moved into canned food. We went to the extrusion process, which is kibble, and then trying to graduate away from kibble. Now we see the whole fresh movement, but it's still not going back to what animals were eating in the wild, because now they're eating rices, potatoes, all sorts of
carrots.
Peas, like carbohydrates type food. And I think this is the next step in our history of food, and it's worrisome to me because it's still companies trying to make money. And are you noticing this? And are you worried about it?
Well, I think really kind of what you're asking about is how justified are we in our anthropomorphizing, giving human qualities to animals? And I don't think there's any denying that the pet has moved from being a cur chained to a wooden box beside the barn to a member on the couch watching TV with you. So there is this going on, but as this has just been the blink of an eye from the standpoint of evolution.
Sure.
The enzymatic machinery that's operating in all mammals is largely unchanged from eons ago. And I would say this, that I have clients that sell all meat diets, and they do that because there's people that want to buy all meat diets. But I also have clients that sell all meat diets with a little vegetable. And I'm involved with an outfit in South Africa that just launched and they're having incredible success. And they've got all meat with a little vegetable. And if I had my choice, I'd have a little vegetable in there. Because, vegetables, let's say your formula is 3 or 4% kale or carrots or whatever. This is going to bring a little carbohydrate, but 3% of the diet and 1% carbohydrate in that 3%, this is well within what traditionally is taken in.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, in all of the studying, and I've done nothing compared to what you've done as far as nutrition, but I feel like we were just starting to come out of it, and now, I'm fine with the veggies. I feed my dog veggies. I think that's great. It's just that the convenience of it. So now people are still reaching for this convenient food, and now we have these companies that can deliver this food to you. But I got to tell you, Dr. Patton, it is loaded in rice and potato and macaroni and peas and carrots. And I feel like that's taking us almost backwards. We're going back because people are now in the mindset that that is what nutrition is. And I don't want to go back. How do we push forward? We just keep communicating it and explaining. Let's do that. Let's explain why carbohydrates are bad for dogs.
Oh. Well, to answer a prior point you just brought up, we're going to have to do this one convert at a time.
I know it.
It's really missionary work. Why are carbohydrates bad? If I turn you loose in the wilderness to survive, and you would, of course, in due time become hungry and find things to eat, and you would find nuts and berries, and you'd maybe catch a fish, and there'd be the occasional haunch of a deer. You'd find many things to eat, some high in protein, some not, some high in fat, some not. Lots of fiber here, not so much there. But the one thing you'd never find is carbohydrate. It is not out there. Mother Nature made carbohydrates very hard to find. Mankind made them very easy.
And cheap.
It's called the Ag Revolution. It began about 10,000 years ago. And what this did was it started its own behemoth rolling forward. So you had these wagon loads of corn, and you could feed your army on the road, and you could conquer your neighbor, and then you could make them grow more corn. And we're back to the earlier observation. This corn diet wasn't an immediate disaster. Everybody got by to the next day. But meanwhile, they died sooner than they should have.
Yeah, yeah. Aside from carbohydrates putting a lot of weight on our dogs, do you think we have an epidemic of diabetes, which is one of the reasons why I had Christy come here. Do you think that is what is causing the diabetes in our dogs, is the carbohydrate contents?
Clearly, it's a contributing factor.
Yeah.
Without doubt. 40% of all humans, and not coincidentally, 40% of all pets are overweight. If you put, and I've done this, put a kennel of dogs that have been on kibble, and you put them on a raw food, they'll all lose weight right away, like 5 to 6% body weight. But then they'll stop, and it'll level out, and they won't lose any body weight. And so, if you want to look at just the biochemistry involved here, there are 8 known hormones that raise blood sugar. There's only one hormone that lowers blood sugar. That's insulin. Mm-hmm. So clearly, the people that designed Mother Nature intended for there to be multiple ways to support blood sugar, keep it up to a minimum. And they had this one player on the bench called insulin. And that was there for the rare occasion when you got into a patch of berries and you picked out on blueberries for 2 days and your blood sugar spiked. Well, the strategy here was save that energy. So this blood sugar is saved by insulin as fat.
Wow. Yeah, but yet we're just continuing on. Our carbohydrates are cheap. And so they're being put into, where do you see, I always envision, I know that this isn't going to happen, but I would love to see kibble not being really sold as much as it is now. But where do you see the future of nutrition? Do you think we're going to get to that point where the majority of our veterinarians are understanding nutrition? Are you doing a good job?
Well, first of all, let's maintain perspective. All those people out there on kibble, that's the source of all your clients. The people who wake up one day and say, there's got to be a better way, and they come to you. I just kind of try and, go by what I perceive as the wisdom, the logic, the truth. And we're going to have to let history judge how we did. I'm convinced what I want to say and what advice I want to give. And there are those that will critique this point of view of mine. But the thing that always drives me has from the very beginning, I don't want to be judged by history like they do the physicians that bloodlet George Washington to death.
Yeah.
There's just, let's not go back as far as the earth is flat, but this was the accepted thinking at one point.
Yeah.
And we just have to take the science, make our decisions, and tell our truth.
Yeah. That's what we're doing, just telling our truth and getting it out there and getting more people to understand, why. That's why it was important to bring you on, because I wanted people to understand that so many veterinarians will say, oh, that's just the crazy person at the dog food store. But there are an enormous amount of people like yourself who do have the science behind it and do have the degrees behind it, who are coming out and talking and helping us educate each other and formulating. Dr. Patton, if I hadn't mentioned it, formulates a lot of dog food companies. He helps formulate, and I haven't really announced it too much, so I'm not going to announce it much. But Dr. Patton is working with me actually, because I want to formulate a dog food for people, and so we're in the process of working that together too. So, and that's my fight and my legacy, and how I want to be remembered is, being able to have to be this voice that can try to get our animals healthy, because they can live longer, they can live healthier, they can live free of, all of these problems like arthritis and inflammation and. So I guess another question, would you ever recommend rice to one of your clients for a dog to be eating rice? Isn't it inflammatory to be feeding rices and potatoes, carbohydrates?
There's about 80 different cultivars of rice in the world.
Yeah.
Most of the world gets their nutrition from rice. And it's there's good news here. There's not much protein in rice, but the protein that's there is very high quality. Mm-hmm. And there are times when I do recommend rice as part of a diet. But the other thing, I don't, it's not my intention to lecture the choir here, but I think a really important thing I learned is one time, quite some time ago, when I was lecturing in Australia, in a post-lecture noshing, one of these people said to me, the reason they call you Dr. Patton is because your brain is scarred. And
what?
Wait a minute. And of course, I reacted to that like most anybody would, but I thought about this, and it's true. Everybody's brain is scarred. Either you were a mother or you weren't. Either you were in the Army or you went to college. No matter what you did, it scarred your outlook.
Sure.
And so where does this leave us? You got to come back to your interaction with others with an open mind. The fact that they haven't drank the same Kool-Aid as you, and you got to be patient in visiting with them.
Yes. No, thank you for reminding me that, because when you're inundated around sick animals all day, every day, and as I am, I do often pull myself back and remember that I'm going to get them to drink that Kool-Aid, but I can only get them to do it if I'm understanding of where they come from and what they do. And I'm pretty good at like working with people to do as much as they can do. But it is frustrating to see that, so many years ago, we changed the course of dog food and I want us to be further along and we're not where we need to be. And in some ways, I think we're going backwards, which is a struggle for me to watch happen.
Yes.
But having
the fastest growing segment of the pet food industry is freeze dried.
Yes. Yes.
And now, I mean, it's still tiny compared to kibble, but it is the fastest growing. And anyone who's got freeze dryers has all the work they can handle, as well as suitors to buy them.
Yeah. I think that the reason for that is because it is helping with the convenient part of wanting, which means we're kind of doing our job from a nutrition standpoint, because people are wanting to do better nutrition and understanding the value of it, but they still really want that convenience.
Right.
So
Carrie, you're absolutely right that the freeze dried ticks another box. You now have 2 of the 3 legs.
Yep.
You have convenience and you have proper nutrition.
Right. Yeah. So, but at least it's still a step in the right direction. So I'll accept it. So what else is going on, do you think, with the history of dog food? Anything else?
I believe your crystal ball is accurate. I think that this is going to grow. It's going to be slow.
Yeah.
And it's going to have its ups and downs and frustrations. But as the pet moves from the backyard to the living room couch, more and more in our minds, the more they're looked upon as family members, the more people are going to worry about what they feed them.
Yeah.
And this will provide us opportunities.
Yeah. Well, I think we move further along each time a pet dies unnecessarily, which is really sad to say, but for every time a pet owner loses an animal, that pushes them further, and then their communication gets pushed further. So at some point, people will really realize that if you don't want your dog to have arthritis, or your last pet died from arthritis, or your last pet died from cancer, that's really what catapults us forward.
That's what catapulted me.
Yeah.
I lost a German Shepherd to cancer very quickly, but from the time she was diagnosed to the time I was putting her down was 3 weeks, I believe. And so it was like, okay, what did I do wrong? How can I make this better?
Yeah.
Doctor, is it better to feed? I know raw probably would be the best, but if you're in the place where you would rather cook the dog's food, so you're taking out any bacteria risk in your mind, is that at least better than the kibble? And
let me answer that question this way. First of all, cooked versus not, I don't particularly care. And the difference in nutrition between cooked or raw is not that great. We have to worry about much larger issues than that. So cook it or not, as you or your pet prefers. Perhaps we should say, as your pet has trained you. But,
definitely.
This is back to the issue. For example, chicken bought from the grocery store for people runs about 7.5% positive for salmonella. And the authorities know this, and they'll still allow it. Well, the reason they do is because the chicken they know will be cooked before it's fed. And so it's incumbent upon us to tell people that feed raw that they got to use common sense. I mean, you don't put the food down, and if it's not all eaten, leave it on the counter and put it down again the next day. You wouldn't do that with your kids and hamburger.
Right.
And so we don't want to do that with these foods. But Christina, I got to ranting here. Have I answered your question?
Yes, I think so. That it doesn't really matter.
That it's not that much of a difference.
No.
It's minimal difference between the cooking and the raw. So if you're more comfortable cooking it, it's still better than kibble, is what you're saying, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, look, all of us have eaten, every meal we eat every day is cooked. and we seem to be getting along okay.
Right. But that leads me to another kind of push for the industry, for the pet food industry to be okay with. You and I both know that a lot of dog food companies now, the manufacturers of dog foods, have had some pressure from the FDA to do things like HPP, which is high pressurization. But these companies try to keep that hidden. And I actually think there's a place for them, and they should come out and say it and not be afraid to say that their food has been pressurized to ensure that it doesn't happen. Because you have a lot of people who are on the fence. They don't want their children to be playing with their dog. I just did a consultation on a lady the other day, and she chose an HPP food that I sell, and because her vet had scared her into thinking that her children were going to get salmonella because the dog has a lot of hair. But all of these companies don't want to say that they're doing that because they have come out as a raw, right, Dr. Patton? They want to be raw, and they think if they say they're HPP. But what you're telling us right now is these differences probably aren't that big of a deal for us to worry about, right?
Well, we once again run into the problem that you know too much, you ask too many questions. The HPP, as far as I'm concerned, falls under the category of render to Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God's. And where the commercial pet food industry finds themselves is they're going to have to jump through endless painful hoops to satisfy the regulators. But if they'll HPP, the regulators will go worry about somebody else. And so many people are doing HPP just to get the feds off their back.
Right.
And because if you do HPP, I mean, there are documented cases of salmonella in HPP food. And then there's this too. What level of HPP are you going to use? For how much pressure, for how long? And will there be a loss of appetite on the part of the pet owner to buy something that looks like it's been pressurized for years?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't lend itself to a straightforward answer as far as I'm concerned. I'm saying, fine, just about everybody's HPPing. That means everybody's having to either absorb the cost or pass it along. In the marketplace, will take care of that.
Yeah.
That price situation.
Are there other...
Meanwhile, excuse me, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Are there other ways that they can do that other than HPP? I know some are saying that you can put your own bacteria into the food and that will get rid of the bad bacteria, but aren't there a few other ways you can satisfy the FDA as far as making sure that your food doesn't leave the pet store with salmonella?
I'm not the one to ask.
Okay.
I don't have insight there. And if you ask that of the regulatory people, what you're going to get is their version of the truth of what you ought to do.
Right.
And they're going to parrot what they've been told. This is evil and bad, and it'll kill. We don't care about pets, but it'll get their children, and it's our job to protect the children.
Yeah.
And so they're particularly motivated to do what they've been instructed.
Yeah, yeah. I did have a veterinarian once tell a parent that he wasn't worried about her getting salmonella, but he was worried that if her children played with the dog's poop in the backyard, that they could pick up salmonella. That's the exact look you should get. Because I to this day think, whose kids are playing in the dog's poop in the backyard? Like
By accident, stepping
maybe,
in it,
yeah.
dropping their ball
Right.
in it, but
He made it sound like that was a huge way that the poop was going to get, that salmonella was going to get transferred, but anyway. But so there's a lot that's happened in the history of dog food, right, Dr. Patton?
Oh, absolutely. And it will continue. One of the, probably the single most frequent question in the Q&A after I lecture, it's always the person who finally says, my dog is 15 and they have cancer, what should we feed? The answer I never give, but is the one I'd like to give. Well, the time to ask that question was 15 years ago.
Yep.
It so happens there are things you can do, and surprise, surprise, one of them is get rid of the soluble carbohydrate.
Right, right.
And there is growing evidence that this makes a difference.
But that is such I'm probably going to end there because I want people to understand that is exactly the time to ask those questions is when you're picking up those puppies and you're starting out is when you are to ask what I should feed, not after the case. And of course we could do little things and we can add medicinal mushrooms and we can do all of these things to try to help alleviate. But the time you should be asking what your dog should eat should become at the moment you take that animal into your home, not once they're already sick.
Yeah.
So I think we'll end on there. Dr. Patton, is there anything else you want to add to this talk?
Oh, do we have 2 days?
We do. But I'd have to call you tomorrow and the next day, which I will do. We'll do some more, but is there anything?
No, I think you've been very good listeners, and I'm very grateful. And what we need to do is process this, and you come up with some more questions, we'll do it again.
Okay, I have one more question. Tell me about
Okay.
Tell me about your book. I want everyone to get this book. It's amazing.
Oh,
Ruined by Excess.
yeah, it's here it is.
Oh, you got it? Okay,
I
good.
can show you.
I have a picture of it, so it'll be up on our YouTube. But, aw, is that one of your dogs?
No, that I had when the first edition was a picture of this really grossly obese dog on the streets of the French Quarter in New Orleans, and the next publisher didn't want to use that.
Aw.
And so they went to this cute little lab puppy.
Yeah.
And you know, at this point I can't rewrite this book because everything I felt like needed to be said was said, and it's science. There hasn't been any big breakthroughs in the past 10 years. I think this came out like 4 years ago, the second edition.
Yeah.
But I think that the ambition of the book is to inform people, inform their decisions, and give them what they need to know to ask the right questions.
Right.
So I certainly suggest everyone read the book.
Yeah.
Not because I wrote it, but I mean, I read 40 or 50 other pet nutrition books before I wrote this one.
Yeah.
And I feel it fills a niche.
It does. I've read the book and I love the book, and I absolutely recommend it to people to read because it's easy to understand, and I recommend it because he wrote the book. So I'm gonna end there, and we'll have all of this information on our show notes for our listeners so that they can reach out to you, or is the book's on Amazon though, right?
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
But mostly, I think the best place to get it is Dogs Naturally magazine.
Oh yeah.
And their website will take you there.
Yeah, I'll put their website on there. So, Dr. Patton, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. Thank you.
It is.
Christina, Carrie.
Thank you.
Christina, I also want to thank you. But before we go, I also want you to know that Christina is involved in a lot of different charities and things that she does, and it's important to her. So I want her to take this moment to let you know about the charity that she's involved in.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's Pediatric Cancer Research Foundation, and they're based here in Southern California also. And I wasn't too familiar with pediatric cancers, but I found them, and it shocked me to hear that less than 4% of federal cancer fundings go to pediatrics. Everything else go to adult cancers.
Wow.
And these kids are our futures, and they deserve everything we can put at them and their cancers.
Yeah.
So I run their race every year. Normally I run the half marathon. This year they can't do a live half marathon,
yeah.
so I'm probably going to be doing a 5K, 10K
Yeah.
type of thing. But they do amazing work.
Awesome.
Majority of their money goes to funding for research throughout the country. Very little to, day-to-day
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
So
yeah.
definitely, if you're looking for somewhere to donate or
Yeah.
get involved, they're
Right.
always looking for help.
Awesome.
And so it's pcrf-kids.org, I believe.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much.
I'll have that on our show notes as well too. So I just wanted to put that out there. Cancer is affecting our animals, our elderly, and our children, and we all work together and we find solutions and stuff. So I wanted to make sure we talked about
you.
that, because I know that the pediatric cancer is doing research to try to prevent as well. So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you, Dr. Patton, Christy, for being here. Make sure you follow us on all our social media channels. We have Facebook, it's the SPA, THE, capital SPAW. And we also have YouTube channel called the Spawdcast. So we'll see you guys later. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Dr. Patton.